The Curse of Ravenwood Manor. It was the winter of 1900 when Elizabeth Trump, a 12-year-old girl with a curious mind and a gentle demeanor, arrived with her parents at Ravenwood Manor. The sprawling estate, tucked deep in the heart of the English countryside, had been in the family for generations but had stood empty for decades. Elizabeth's father, a businessman with lofty ambitions, had inherited it unexpectedly after the sudden death of a distant relative. From the moment they arrived, Elizabeth felt uneasy. The manor's towering spires loomed against the gray sky, its windows like dark, watchful eyes. The villagers had whispered warnings as the Trumps passed through the town. They spoke of strange occurrences, shadows in the windows, and a curse that had driven the last occupants mad. But Elizabeth's father dismissed these stories as superstitions, determined to restore the manor to its former glory. Her mother, a practical woman, busied herself with unpacking. Elizabeth, however, couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The first night that evening, Elizabeth wandered the grand halls, her footsteps echoing in the vast silence. The air was cold, and the flickering candlelight cast eerie shapes on the walls. As she passed a portrait of a young girl about her age, she froze. The girl in the painting had striking blue eyes and an expression of sorrow so profound it seemed to reach through the canvas. Beneath the portrait was a brass plate engraved with a name, Margaret Ravenwood, 1888. Elizabeth felt a chill as she stared at the portrait. It was almost as if the girl's eyes were following her. A faint whisper brushed past her ear, too soft to understand, but it sent shivers down her spine. She turned quickly, but the hall was empty. That night, Elizabeth's dreams were filled with strange images. Margaret standing in a dark room, her lips moving soundlessly as she pointed toward a large door. Behind it, Elizabeth heard faint cries. Mrs. Thatcher only muttered about a tragedy and the price of forbidden knowledge, the secret of the Ravenwoods. Over the following days, Elizabeth began to piece together the story of Margaret Ravenwood. She learned from old journals and letters she found in the library that Margaret had been a lonely child, often left to wander the estate while her parents entertained guests. But Margaret had a secret, an imaginary friend she called Sylas. According to the journals, Sylas wasn't imaginary at all. Margaret's parents had been obsessed with spiritualism and the occult. They had held seances in the West Wing, summoning spirits to communicate with the dead. One night, they invited something into the manor, something dark. Margaret claimed Sylas was her protector, but the servants wrote of strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, whispers in the night, and Margaret speaking in a voice that wasn't hers. Eventually, the entire family disappeared, leaving the manor abandoned. The awakening Elizabeth's dreams grew more vivid. Margaret appeared each night, her urgency increasing. "Help me," she would plead. "You must set me free." Determined to uncover the truth, Elizabeth pried open the sealed door with a crowbar she found in the cellar. The stench of decay hit her as she stepped inside. The room was cold, the air thick with malevolence. At its center stood a stone altar, its surface stained dark with something Elizabeth didn't want to identify. On the wall was a mirror, its surface cracked but strangely reflective. As Elizabeth approached, her reflection warped, and suddenly Margaret appeared beside her in the glass. "You shouldn't have come," Margaret said, her voice echoing unnaturally. Before Elizabeth could respond, the mirror shattered, and the room erupted into chaos. Shadows spilled from the walls, coalescing into a figure, tall, thin, and grotesque, with hollow eyes and unnaturally long fingers. Elizabeth screamed as the figure reached for her, but Margaret's voice rang out, firm and commanding. "Sylas, no!" The figure hesitated, its form wavering. Taking her chance, Elizabeth grabbed a silver dagger she had seen on the altar and drove it into the figure's chest. It let out an ear-splitting shriek before dissolving into a cloud of smoke. The curse is broken. When Elizabeth awoke, she was lying in the middle of the West Wing, the room now empty and silent. The air felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. Margaret's portrait was gone from the hall, replaced by an empty frame. Mrs. Thatcher found her and knelt beside her, tears streaming down her face. "You've done it," she whispered. "The curse is broken." The Trumps left Ravenwood Manor soon after, unable to bear the memories of what had happened. But Elizabeth would never forget the sorrowful eyes of Margaret or the malevolent presence of Sylas. Even now, when Elizabeth speaks of Ravenwood, she warns others. Some doors are best left unopened, and some spirits are best left undisturbed. This chilling tale reminds us that curiosity can lead to dark places, and some secrets are buried for a reason.